Oi, 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 everyone, and welcome back to another video. We've already created a DBD match overview guide that will walk you through your first few matches of Dead by Daylight. You can find that video here, of course, but as we all move forward in our Dead by Daylight journey, let's get more specific. Let's help out our survivor buddies. So, piggybacking off of our old video, and in partnership with Dead by Daylight, here is our Survivor Beginner's Guide. Now, as a disclaimer, this guide is intended for survivors with only a handful of hours and or a fairly low rank in the game. But if you feel stuck, there still may be some nuggets of info that you can take away from this. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right in. I want to go ahead and start off mentioning perks. There are a plethora of videos on YouTube discussing perks, the best perks, what to get first, and we're going to work on a video for that. However, while perks are great and incredibly helpful, perks shouldn't be relied on to entirely save you. Getting the best perks while not knowing the maps, the layout, how to be chased by the killer, when to unhook, etc. will just result in you getting frustrated, misusing those perks, and more. So while you're on your quest for great perks, don't forget to learn the fundamentals. Perks are to help augment and give you a boost, not to be used as crutches. Now, diving into actual tips, let's discuss something I don't see enough people learning early, and that is panning your camera. Having the awareness to know what is going on around you and from where is integral to being able to survive more matches. This is doubly so when you're being confronted by the killer head to head. Panning your camera is when you spin your camera a direction different than the direction that your survivor is looking. Now, to do this, it is important to note that the mouse controls the camera and the survivor is being controlled by the keyboard. On controller, your right stick pans your camera while the left stick controls your survivor. If panning your camera to try to look to the right, you'll move your mouse to the right as you slide from the W key to the A key. Mentally, remember you want to be pressing the key that corresponds to the direction that your character is facing as you pan the camera the direction you want the camera to face. This all seems complicated, but in practice it'll start to make more sense. This is the same for panning your camera left. If you're holding W to move forward, you'll slide your mouse to the left so that your camera pans left, and you'll slide from the W key to the D key because your survivor is now looking to the right. You can even take this a step further and learn to fully look behind you by sliding to the S key after you hit A or D and continue panning your camera. On controller, stuff's a little bit easier to learn. It doesn't feel as cerebral, but if you're panning your camera to the right, you'll move the right analog stick to the right, which is where your camera is going to face, and you'll move your left analog stick to the left, which is the direction your character is going to be facing as you pan. And to pan to the left, you'll move your right analog stick to the left, where your camera is going to go, and you'll keep your character moving to the right, so your left stick will move to the right, so they continue that momentum. It is important to note that as you start learning camera panning, you won't want to always be looking behind you. After all, you do need to know where you're going. So try your best to get used to moving back and forth every few seconds in a chase. Check where you're going, line it up, look behind you, see where the killer's at, look in front of you, etc. Panning your camera is something you should also be doing when you're on gens, totems, healing, etc., so that you're not caught off guard by an approaching killer or a stealthy killer that's sitting out there in the bushes. Next, let's help you find generators, alright? This is where survivors often struggle the most. You may spawn closely to a gen, but what happens after the first one is done? Where do you go? What about towards the end of the match, when one gen is remaining, but you can't seem to find the gen? Well, it's important to know that on most maps, there are gens scattered throughout the outer edge of the map, with one or two gens pecked in the middle. As mentioned in our prior video, you could take a look at the horizon on any outdoor map. You should see these lamps sticking up off the horizon, and if those lamps are flickering light, then those are uncompleted gens. Now, if a lamp is producing constant light, then that gen has already been completed. Now, for indoor maps like Raccoon City Police Department, Larry's, or Hawkins, you'll often see overhead lights flickering to indicate a gen, or you'll see door signs flickering outside of doors. A door sign flickering means that that room in question does have a generator inside of it. In any map with houses, you'll see the lights inside of the house flickering to indicate this as well. And on Gideon Meatpacking Plant, you'll see these giant blast doors. If you see one of these, a gen is located directly on one side or the other of that blast door. Now that you know where gens are located, let's help you figure out when it's safe enough to repair them. We've all been there, working on a gen, minding our own business, when all of a sudden we hear that terror radius, that heartbeat that indicates that the killer's nearby. We hear the music swell, and so we get off the gen, and we crouch walk away. He must be coming for us, right? Then a survivor gets downed, hooked, and there we are, still scared in the corner, not quite sure what we should be doing. When each survivor is doing this, it can make a game grind to a halt and allow killers to absolutely run wild. It's important to realize that a killer being near doesn't mean that they're coming for you necessarily. This is where panning your camera can be very helpful. If you can get a bead on the action, you may see a survivor being chased 10 meters away, and in this case, you're 100% safe to keep working on your generator. The general rule is to stick on a generator unless you are specifically and clearly the target of the killer's ire. Sometimes you can even infer what is happening just by watching your HUD. If a survivor becomes wounded, well then you know the killer's probably preoccupied chasing that one person, leaving you safe for now to continue working. This is equally true for if a killer's picking up a downed survivor or hooking that survivor. They're busy, they're tied up for a little bit, you're safe to continue working for now. On the other side of the coin, if you hear a terror radius and are worried that the killer is genuinely coming for you, and that terror radius is getting louder and swelling, it may behoove you to hop off of the gen and just take a slow look around. If you just run the minute you hear a terror radius, you risk running right into the killer or absolutely revealing your location when they otherwise wouldn't quite have known where you were. Now that we've covered objectives, let's discuss the inevitable chases, alright? Chasing is a deeply complicated thing in Dead by Daylight, but it is the core tenet of the game, and at a high level, it's the most fun thing in the game, for both sides, in my opinion. That being said, you need to practice chases early. It's fun to play Dead by Daylight like a hide-and-seek simulator, but doing this can ruin your future in the game. As you begin escaping more matches and ranking up, killers begin getting smarter and better. They'll begin finding you easier and downing you faster, and because you ranked up by playing hide and seek, you'll now be practicing chases against fairly competent killers, instead of going against killers who were new like you. So practice having fun in chases as soon as you can. Enjoy that. Now, with regards to the start of chases, you should always be panning your camera, looking for an escape plan while you're working on gens, totems, or healing. This usually means looking around to know where your nearest pallet or window is, so that if the killer heads your way, you can use these items, the pallets and windows, to waste some of the killer's time. When a killer approaches you and is committed to chasing you, you'll want to enact your escape plan, throwing pallets or vaulting windows to get some distance away from the killer. You'll also want to get some practice in panning your camera and looking behind you during chases so you can react to where killers are going or coming from. Otherwise, you may end up running right into them when they try to cut you off and having no idea the wiser. Looking behind you will also help you learn to loop killers, which is when you run circles around a particular obstacle or set of obstacles to waste the killer's time. We'll deep dive into this incredibly deep topic in the near future in a separate video, so don't stress too hard on that, but just know that this is a very important thing that you'll want to pick up on when you have time. As an addendum, if you're being chased by the killer, do not unhook a teammate. And this segues into our next segment. Let's go over unhooking teammates and healing. As discussed in our prior video, you can endure being hooked 3 times total in a match, and when you're hooked you have 2 stages, Stage 1 and Stage 2. Stage 1 is just sitting on the hook, and Stage 2 is struggling against the entity. Both of these stages have a 60-second duration at maximum. When it comes to unhooking teammates, it is important to be patient. Even with specific perks, there is no need to have to unhook someone within just a few seconds of them being hooked or while the killer is near. In many cases, it is far better to let the killer leave the hook and get into another chase or another scenario before unhooking. If you're at a distance, work on your gen for another 10 seconds or so, and then leave for the unhook. If you're close to the hook, wait for the killer terror radius to die down before unhooking. Waiting until the killer is invested elsewhere will also help to dissuade that killer from returning to the hook, right? If you unhook and the killer is only 10 meters away, they're probably going to double back and see if they can get you. It is way safer to wait for both you and your teammate so that you may heal up and get ready to get back out there on gens. Now, in some cases, you may see a killer camp a hook. Camping is just standing in front of that hook, waiting for people to come unhook so that the killer can down them too. In some cases, a killer may quote-unquote proxy camp, which is when they just sort of hover in the vicinity of the hook, looking out for survivors as they try to run in. If a killer is legitimately camping, I say it is always better to go work on as many generators as possible. Often killers who camp are killers who have had success with this strategy in the past, and while it sucks to be on the hook in this scenario, if everybody works on generators and escapes while the killer spends 2 minutes standing there camping 1 kill, well, this is pretty good punishment for this particular behavior, and this may force the killer to second guess this scenario in the future. As you get better at the game, there are plenty of moments where you can finesse the killer and get an unhook while they're camping, but in many cases this could end in disaster early on in your DBD career, and I recommend steering clear for now and just slamming those generators. Now that being said, it is important to note that if a killer sees scratch marks in the vicinity of a hook, they're justified in sticking around and looking for the survivor who left those scratch marks. This is why being distant and patient is important. You want the killer to leave to find other people. Being too close to the hook while someone is on it generates too much pressure that benefits killers. And lastly, let's go ahead and discuss healing. After you've been unhooked or after losing a killer, you may be inclined to want to heal, and that's perfectly okay. The important thing with healing is to know where to heal. A good example is to not run to the outside edge of the map to heal. In the event of the killer finding or tracking you here, you generally have no pallets, windows, or escape plans you can really use at your disposal. Simultaneously, if you get unhooked and run for 10 seconds to get to the edge of the map, well, a heal generally takes about 16 seconds to perform. You could have been almost healed by now, but now you're running for 10 seconds and healing for 16, and that means you've wasted nearly 30 seconds of game time. Ideally, you'd like to always heal near a pallet or a window, so if you're caught out by a killer, you have escape routes, so keep this in mind when you're unhooked. And again, pay attention to your HUD and pan your camera around. If you notice someone just took damage, then the killer may be too preoccupied to come back to that hook, meaning you're likely safe to be healed. However, if you hear a terror radius returning, then it may behoove you to enact your escape plan that you've been plotting, given you've panned the camera and determined where the killer is returning from. As an addendum to all of this, your healing doesn't always take priority. You definitely need to pay attention to your HUD. If someone else needs to be unhooked, you may need to be brave enough to go for that unhook before you heal, or else they could die on hook, and that infinitely hurts your team. This especially applies if you're healing yourself solo. And that is it for the beginner's guide, one of many guides from beginner to advanced that is going to help you conquer Dead by Daylight and become the legend you knew you always could be. Thank you guys for being here. Let me know down in the comments below what you learned, and I'll be praying to the entity to see you guys in the next videos.